What is up, Waffle Gang? I do hope you are well. My name is Mark and today we're covering some r/AskReddit. If you are new here, please consider hitting that like, that subscribe, and maybe that notification bell too. And with that being said, let's just crack on with today's stories, because I'm excited about this one. Today we are covering What Are Your Nightshift Horror Stories? And we're going to start with Greatwood. Worked a parking garage at the airport, cleaning the top deck, and noticed about 100 ravens all over a truck with a tarp over the bed. Took my flashlight expecting something awful. Noticed as I got closer the smell and the ravens taking turns going in the hole, they're torn open and popping out covered in gunk. Some guy left a broke down beater with a couple of animal carcasses in the back to rot, no heads. Checked the logs and the damn truck had been there since November and it was April, so everything was just thawing and breaking down. Oh god. Grand Admiral D says, warning, medical gross stuff incoming. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside a motorcycle versus 75 mph headfirst to the asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of crowfab we gave him, but it was still the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilised, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility, all the blood, those weren't the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never, ever forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery-powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil, trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes, by some miracle, the patient did end up surviving, and as far as I know, he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all. Yeah, never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Murphy's cousin-in-law says, did hospital security for about 2 months. It was a small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who passed from their rooms and transferring into the morgue freezer. We just brought a descendant to the morgue, and right before we were about to transfer them to the freezer, their cell phone rang. Granted, pretty tame compared to some stories, but at the time, it gave us a decent fright. And that one's a pretty sad one because that's probably a relative or a friend trying to get in touch with, their friend or their relative, Oh, man. And Odd42 says, was an orderly in hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office, looking at us a little shifty. Came back again and asked us if we had access to the morgue. We said yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home. But that seemed strange given it was around 12:30 am. Nope, he wanted us to pay us to let him in, and leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently he tried it in the past, as security knew him. God damn, that reminds me of one of the films in Kill Bill. I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, something like that similar happens. But Throne says, used to work a night shift at a 24-hour Walmart. Customers are nuts enough even in daytime, but they become weird after midnight. Once had an elderly guy come in only wearing a jean jacket and fishnet stockings. He came up to my register, leaned in and asked if we carried anything to get rid of lice. Those plastic barriers all stores have now to protect cashiers, they need to keep those even after the pandemic ends. I lost count of all times customers got into my personal space to ask about products for fleas, lice, rashes, etc. The Gambler X says, I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some arsehole kept walking around the courtyard after dark, dressed as the Grim Reaper, knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. That's like a really insensitive and nasty thing to do, really, isn't it? Wow. And Chumbucket311 says, I worked in a residential treatment centre for teen girls. One girl with some severe trauma came sleepwalking into the room, screaming to please untie her while clawing at her wrists. She was begging me to help her because he's torturing me. I sat her down and pulled her bracelets and watch off. She went completely limp, then got up and went back to bed. It freaked me out seeing the raw emotion of her trauma, since she was always smiling and relatively calm during the day. Another time I was doing my nightly checks and a guy suddenly walked out from behind the door coming at me. I screamed and threw my flashlight at him. It was a smiley face balloon. Wow. Danger 10 says, used to work night shift in a middle school. Every night while cleaning out the boys' locker room, I would hear at least one locker slam shut, sometimes more. This creeped me out when I started, but after a couple of months I got used to it. One night while cleaning one of the girls' locker rooms, I hear a girl scream. I walked out of the locker room, even looked outside the building, didn't see anybody. Before that I worked at the high school, I'd randomly hear doors open and close. Nowadays I work day shift at another school. About a year ago, I just got to the building to begin my shift. It was still dark out and I was turning on all the lights. When I walked by the main office, I heard what sounded like someone ransacking the place, papers being tossed. I heard what sounded like a table or file cabinet being dragged. I remember my first thought was, man, somebody must have lost something important. Then I clicked. It was 6 in the morning and it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas break, meaning that there was no school and there shouldn't be anybody in there. Took me a second to work up the courage to go in and check it out. When I did, nobody was there and nothing was out of place. Finally, last month I get a call from dispatch at 3 AM. The fire alarm was going off and they needed somebody to go and turn it off. As soon as I walk in, I freak out. The alarm is blaring, but what scared me was the strobe light that flashes with the alarm. The building was pitch black, except every other second, that strobe that lit the halls up. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie, where they're looking for the killer. I was half expecting to see someone pop up out of nowhere when the halls lit up. Oh shit, that reminds me when I was younger, my mum, before she passed away, and a few years before that, when she was working as a caretaker for our, I think they call it County Hall or something like that, and next to it is Oxford Castle, where there's Hangman Hill, and they're all attached through like corridors underneath and stuff like that, and you could access that area. And I remember being there with my mum once, like really early in the morning. The place is really dark, and I tell you, man, that gave me some serious creepy vibes walking about there. I'm not sure what I believe in terms of all that sort of stuff, but there are some creepy noises going on. I tell you, I didn't leave my mum's side that day. And when I said it was like a few years before, I was a lot younger then. I'm not like 16. And Ghoul Thrower 676 says, was walking through the simulation lab for nursing students at the hospital I work at on very little sleep. All the lights were off, and it was my first time working night shift. Turned a corner and saw what I thought was a person standing behind the lamp that was on. Turns out it was a mannequin holding the pull cord. Really freaked me out, and I was awake after that. Love to Puck 37 says, work in the winter for me is ploughing and snow removal. It was late and I'd been out for over 24 hours at this point. Pulled over into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over 100 yards away, so I could let the truck stay on so I could stay warm. 6-wheel Mac, things loud. As I'm nodding off, there was a very loud bang and it felt like someone then pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily, I always lock my truck doors. I immediately threw on every strobe, rear, headlight and started looking around and saw absolutely nothing. It scared the shit out of me. Needless to say, I never sleep anywhere other than lit parking lots now. And Steve's McQueen is here says, worked as an evening manager at a major Hilton property. Got a complaint from a bunch of guests about the noise coming from one of the rooms. Turns out a drunken man was beating the shit out of his wife and had the door barricaded so we couldn't get in. I called the cops and they had to get into the room using the balcony from the room next over. I'm still traumatized by what I saw when they finally arrested him and got the wife out the room. She was covered in blood. It was horrifying. And my poor brain says, worked night shift at a large grocery store. One that wasn't open overnight but had a skeleton crew to work loads and do prep and clean. I worked near the entrance, large glass doors but visually blocked off from my vantage point. Around 3 AM, I hear knocking on the doors. This isn't completely uncalled for. Usually it's someone coming in for an early shift but didn't have a key card. Sometimes it's someone's food delivery or sometimes a customer who thinks we opened despite clearly being closed. I approach the door. It's a man that I don't recognise, wet from the rain. He looks normal enough, but something about him unnerved me. He had that vibe with him, the one where it seems like maybe they're on their way to becoming a full-blown meth head, but for now they still manage to give the appearance of functionality. He was holding his shit together just enough to appear normal, but the edges were definitely shaky. Anyway, without unlocking the door, I announced that the store was closed. He told me that he just needed my help. His car had broken down in the parking lot and he needed a boost. I didn't drive, so I told him I couldn't help him. I should have walked away there, but he was out in the rain and I did legitimately feel bad. So I told him I would see if anyone of our crew did drive. I did find someone who was willing to help and got the night crew manager involved as well. We went out, turns out he was parked a bit from the entrance in a fairly secluded spot, and he had a lady with him. There was a similar vibe with her, almost but not exactly normal. It didn't click right away, but I figured they'd been hooking up in the car in the parking lot, maybe left radio or lights on and drained the battery. To me, that explained the weird unnerving feeling. They either felt ashamed or guilty and it was showing through. Anyway, my co-worker goes over to help, give them a boost. The manager I stay out there with him, nearby, watching. The two lovebirds kept peeking over at us a bit uncomfortably. After a few moments, the co-worker returns from the car and he hurries us back inside. We don't see them drive off, which is odd. We get inside, lock up, and the co-worker thanks us for staying out there with him and not leaving him alone with them. He also caught on the unnerving air about them and it made him worried. What worried him more was when it also turned out there was nothing wrong with their car. And Law and Order SUV says, not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel and a manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter who dances competitively and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, what about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy? Then proceeds to talk in graphic detail about how he thinks his own daughter has been trying to seduce him for weeks and how he's starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager is looking through a computer system trying to figure out who this man is so she can call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple of months later at around 11 PM, my manager answered the desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, let me guess, you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings. The man immediately hangs up the phone. And Flattered Porn says, it was 3 AM, popular Canadian coffee shop. There is one old baker in the back that rarely interacts with me past a dirty joke or dirtier ditty from his Navy days. Other than that, I'm alone. Not another soul around the area and I expect it to remain so for at least an hour yet. I'm boxing up the days old for the homeless shelter when I swear I see something out the corner of my eye. It's behind me. I turn, then look down. There's a small child standing there. A native little toddler with a faux hawk staring at me intensely. I'm struck dumb with how absurd the situation is. How did he get behind the counter? I didn't hear the door open or see him come through the counter. I scan the storefront. No one. I yell for the baker in case he has a friend or something visiting that lost their kid. He comes over and, like me, does a double take at the kid and is baffled. Kid starts muttering incoherently. I get him a glass of water and a donut hole and the baker runs out of the store to do a perimeter of the block. I call the non-emergency line and explain I have a little kid with no parents. I can't get any information from the boy. Just mumbles I can't make out. Police arrive, Baker comes back and says he can't find anyone else in the streets. The guy from the 24/7 corner store said he'd keep an eye out. Police try to speak with the kid and get nothing but mutterings and half-hearted gestures. They take him away. I see them again for their morning coffee and they told me that the little guy walked several kilometers from the nearest reservation in the dead of night to my store. He had got into his parents' medicine cabinet and just walked out the house. I'm floored. It must have taken that poor baby hours to get to me. Seeing him behind me like that in the dead of night still shakes me. Spooked me more than the guy that threw a pot of coffee at me, the woman that tried to stab me with a plastic spoon because I refused to give her a metal one, and the dude that waited around 4 hours hoping to catch me alone so he could teach me a lesson since I didn't have the flavour of bagel he wanted. And Cataplasia says, I was working the Christmas Eve night shift in my local emergency department. The clock struck 4 AM on Christmas morning and the emergency buzzer sounded. A 74-year-old male patient had gone into sudden cardiac arrest. The buzzer wasn't working properly, so we couldn't locate where exactly in the department it was coming from. Once we finally figured it out, we got in there and I took over chest compressions. A team of anaesthetists, nurses, doctors, and 20 minutes later we managed to get him back for just long enough for his family to come and say goodbye to him. What a shitty Christmas. And Celador says, I was once staying late doing some scenic painting in the college campus theatre. It was late, pitch black dark outside and very quiet in the building. A few of us were up on stage, not really talking, just taking care of business, when suddenly I saw out the corner of my eye something go very quickly by the open door to the lobby. What the fuck? Then it went by again and I actually saw what it was. A guy with long hair wearing pajamas and no socks or shoes. He was tiptoeing in a very exaggerated way, pulling his knees up very high and grinning. What the fuck? It sounds kind of funny, but it was creepy as hell. We all made eye contact and one of the other painters was about to go shut the door when the dude walked right in. He stood there staring at us for a full minute. You could have heard a pin drop. He threw his arms out to the side dramatically and said, "I am your saviour, Jesus Christ." No one responded and he eventually walked out. I guess he was hoping to get more of a reaction. The door was promptly shut and locked behind him and security called. They were not impressed. Turns out that he was a patient at some sort of group home nearby and had done this multiple times. I still get creeped out to this day if I'm working in a theatre at night though. And J Mendina 94 says, more of a weird event. Sometimes work night shifts. One time was going home at around 4 AM or so. It was pitch dark outside and very quiet. Person on a bike came out of nowhere, said he remembered me from middle school, even said the right school name, and rode off. And DC4 MVP says, I worked in an open quarry mine down in Texas. We had this storm where it rained like a motherfucker for hours and hours. Being night shift, 6:30 PM till 6:30 AM supervisor, I was in charge of 8 Cat 745 haul trucks, 2 Cat 390 excavators, 6 Cat 980 loaders, 2 D8 dozers and 1 D9 dozer. It was around 2 AM and I had 3 haul trucks get stuck in the bottom of the mine, just spinning their tires endlessly. It was horrible. Since we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars of production per shift, I had to get permission to shut the mine down from the superintendent and relay that to the supervisors up in the plant, that the washers dries the material, frac sand. They wouldn't shut down because I said so. I called him at minimum 13 times within an hour to get him to shut the mine down, since it was 2 AM. He never answered, which never happened as he always had his phone on. 3 to 4 of us were soaking wet and covered from head to toe in mud, to the point where you couldn't even tell we were wearing neon green high-vis safety gear. We got the trucks pulled out of the mine after roughly 3 hours of using combo of dozers and loaders and excavators to essentially build a new road from dry materials. The superintendent got in 6 AM for the 6:30 AM to 6:30 PM shift, took one look at the mine and shut it down for the day. Turns out his phone charger came unplugged and his phone died in the middle of the night. Never knew I called. And Formal Mango says, I worked at a regional radio station in the middle of fucking nowhere, Australia. I was the overnight operator, keeping the overnight playlist running, set up for the morning, do all the manual checks the next day, and jump on the desk if anything funky happens. I spent a lot of time sitting in what was essentially a tin shed in the middle of a paddock, with my dog, shoes off, listening to 50s and 60s music, and doing crossword puzzles. Except one night when the roo shooter came through, they spooked the kangaroos in the paddock and one of them jumped headfirst through our office window. So there's me, barefoot and half asleep, with a 6-foot tall kangaroo smashes through the glass window, blood and glass everywhere. My dog starts chasing the kangaroo and I'm chasing my dog. And the kangaroo bounds around the office, knocking shit off the desks in the dark, bleeding everywhere. I ran and opened the studio bay doors and my dog chased it outside, where I'm assuming the poor thing was shot. Then I had to call my boss. And Knipton Fit says, was running the register at a 24-hour supermarket. Stock person comes running into produce, carrying a mop handle screaming, "You motherfucker!" Out of sight, he keeps yelling, "Fucker," and smacking the handle at something. For like 5 minutes. I'm ringing up customers and freaking out because he was losing his mind, but I'm not interested in getting involved in a murder, so I ignore it. Later I find out he was chasing a rat. And Sad Temper says, for a change of pace, here's a nice one. I was taking my break outside and a little mouse came up to me, so I gave him a bit of pot noodle and he sat on the floor next to me munching away on it. Ah. And Nice Bake says, used to work nights at Home Depot. There was one time where for a week or so our store stayed open for 24 hours. For the most part this wasn't really a problem. Typically nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning, except that one couple that came looking for a marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning and the woman was wearing a nice dress. I guess there was also the one young lady who came in looking for toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I'd just gotten off my first break, and she was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits. She was oddly specific about which roll holder she wanted to get to, but the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning and me and another guy were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them, a fucking hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind for not only the guy I was working with to freak out to, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come check out the commotion. Turns out a homeless drunkard had came into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, and had made a nest in the insulation, where he fell asleep. The dude was in bad shape too, like far gone into whatever inebriation that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around the insulation after that, for at least the time the store stayed open 24 hours. God, insulation is like incredibly itchy. That sounds like the worst place to sleep. And the D Funky says, I worked overnight security at a convention center for a few years. One night at like 2 AM, I was on cameras chit-chatting with another officer who manned what we call base. I had 2 other guys and my supervisor out on patrol. I saw a homeless dude go up our outdoor elevator to a public terrace and was keeping an eye on him. No big deal. He goes to the corner just out of reach of our cameras, a corner known to us for people to usually catch a quick nap in. I call on the radio to our nearest patrol officer who was patrolling with my supervisor, that this guy was hanging out there doing whatever. They casually start walking towards the area. Upon their arrival to the scene, next thing I know, on another camera directly below this terrace corner, like 50 feet below, also right outside our office, I see a body drop straight down and land on their legs, collapse into the ground. I quickly stand up from my chair and I'm panicking. Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. I grab the first aid kit and run out the office to go outside. My other officer on base jumps on the phone and calls 911. My supervisor says, "Base, call 911. We're already on it. I'm the first one out there, and this homeless man was writhing in pain, shattered bones protruding from his ankles, bleeding from the mouth, trying to mumble what happened. He manages to roll over and I see his hands are also fucked up, more bones protruding from his wrists. I don't dare touch him and I doubted my first aid kit would have helped at all. My supervisor and other officer came running down the stairs to the scene. Apparently when they arrived to the original scene on the terrace, in my camera's blind spot, the guy was sitting on the ledge with a 50-foot drop directly below him. My supervisor yells, "Hey, get down from there!" And the homeless dude just lifts himself up and drops, not a word spoken. First responders arrive and take him to the hospital. I of course had to write the report and review the video of the incident. A cop comes an hour later and shares his condition, that he survived but he will most likely never walk again. No major internal organ damage. Now for the major coincidence. A few days later, I get a new roommate who brings his girlfriend over. We're all hanging out, talking, drinking. I share that I work security at so-and-so, and the new roommate's girlfriend says, "Oh, didn't you guys just have a homeless man fall from your terrace and almost die?" What the fuck? How does she know that? There was no media coverage. She wasn't there. Apparently she was the godmother of his children. Best friends with the mother. She shares that he was a homeless alcoholic junkie that constantly fought with the police and was in and out of jail multiple times. She got the call that he attempted suicide and rushed with the mother to the hospital to see him. She shared his condition with me, that he was in critical condition but expected to survive. Her and my roommate shortly broke up and I never saw her again. Now, what do you think of today's stories, and do you have any of your own night shift horror stories to add below? I would love to read them. This sort of stuff gets me going. Anyway, thank you for being here today, guys. I hope you did enjoy this whole series of short stories, and thank you to those posters because they're incredible. As I said, I do love this kind of stuff. Anyway, thank you for being here today, guys. I hope you did enjoy, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Much love.